Welcome to the MIA 10-year anniversary celebration. I'm Caroline Uhler, Director of the Eric and Wendy Schmidt Center at the Broad Institute, which has been proudly hosting the Models, Inference and Algorithms MIA meetings for the past few years. We're so excited to bring the MIA community together today for this milestone event. It's the perfect chance to reflect on the past 10 years, celebrate all that's been accomplished, and look ahead to the dynamic future of MIA. A special thanks to our panelists, Alex Bloemendal, one of MIA's co-founders, Aviv Regev, Aleksandrina Goeva, and Gevorg Grigoryan. We're so happy to have you. MIA has been instrumental in bridging communities across mathematics, statistics, machine learning, and biology. We've been hearing from leading and emerging researchers about the latest research that's going on, but also the motivation and intuition that go into the development of the proposed methods. Again and again, participants leave the talks having absorbed new ideas that they apply to their own research, and that's what makes MIA so unique. Through these meetings, we're proud to have built a community where disciplines meet and new ideas spark. We can't wait to see what the future of MIA holds and the broader interdisciplinary field it continues to shape. And now, I'll hand it over to other members of the steering committee. Thank you for being such an important part of the MIA community.
MIA is the avenue where you get the most cutting-edge development and application of machine learning. MIA is a seminar series where we bring in scientists and researchers from other universities and even from all over the world. So it just creates communities, which is important in science. All are coming together to solve a problem that will eventually impact a patient's life. That's the community that MIA has created.
It's an interesting community, right? I mean, now the field of machine learning or artificial intelligence or modeling is really, fusing essentially with the biological systems. 10 years ago, the two fields would really speak different languages, have different cultures, different tastes and so on. And more, I think we're seeing a convergence of the biological sciences and the computational ones becoming part. It's wonderful to have such a seminar hosted here where different researchers can come and also focusing on some of the details and technicalities that go behind the methods that have been developed for biological data.
MIA community is very unique in the sense it's very cross-sectional because we focus on models and inference and analysis as opposed to like a specific biological problem. The current place where MIA is, especially with its strong association with the Schmidt Center, is that there are a lot of people who can provide input to projects that are happening in other parts of the Broad and maybe even contribute. So I think kind of harnessing that availability of computational expertise and the variety of computational expertise, I think would be very helpful.
I've found mentors, I've found collaborators, people that I get to just kind of talk to about my science, thought partners. It's been really fun to be a part of the community and then just kind of be able to, like, if I have a random idea, I'd be like, oh, this person had talked about something adjacent to it. It's quite exciting how much MIA has evolved over the past 10 years, but I feel like that central theme of being a community of people that can work together and like kind of just riff off of ideas has stayed true, which is exciting. I hope that, as the field evolves, we're able to continually kind of change what we're talking about and change the nuances that we are considering in these conversations. Personally, I've gained so much.
I love this community. I presented here 6 years ago, and it was probably one of the most interactive talks I've ever been in, with the most diverse group of computational people probably that I get to interact with. You have people who are in statistics and math and physics, and they all have this interest in biology, kind of widely speaking. The richness of always trying to look out for new ideas, and I just think it's a special community. This community is important because it's really important to stay grounded in both the fundamentals as well as the new things that are emerging in our field.
I think it really helps in cross-contamination between different fields. I think those are one of the few places where you can take a computer scientist and a biologist and both of them can enjoy the talk, where in other cases one of them will not have enough knowledge to understand what we are talking about.
Presenting at MIA is a very unique experience. The separation between the primer and the main talk forces you to sit back and think about what is actually the best way to deliver this material and to engage with the audience. Getting to hang out with a bunch of cool speakers and cool organizers, and so I think that the MIA is just a very fun community in that regard.
The concept of MIA is very special. In that span of a few hours, you're getting a beautiful through line from foundational concepts all the way to the research that is state of the art. I hope that others who attend the talks, they really do feel welcomed to join in the conversation, whether they're in the room or online, and recognize that MIA is more than just the talk series.
We're putting a lot of, powerful heads together. We're getting a lot of people in the same room who, don't have the same background, may not have the same goals, but have to understand, in principle, all of the same types of things at the end of the day.
What's cool is that you have a core group of people from at the Broad, other institutions, and also industry that are coming, that you see it again and again. One thing that's really cool is that we have a lot of junior people and they feel comfortable asking questions and having discussions, and I think that makes it really a lot more lively.
The community that the MIA has created is so meaningful, especially because it's trying to bridge the gap between industry and academia that has existed for a long time in this field. And I think with AI needing more computational resources, bridging that gap is super important right now. Hopefully this community grows more and more people are involved and learning a lot from it.
Our panelists today are Aviv Regev, currently at Genentech. Yeah, please come up. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. We have Aviv Regev, formerly of the Broad and currently in Genentech. We have Alex Bloemendal, who is still at the Broad, one of the MIA co-founders. We have Aleksandrina Goeva, who was a former MIA co-chair, currently at University of Toronto, who does a lot of single cell and neuroscience and things like that. And we have Gevorg Grigoryan, currently at Generate Biomedicines. All people with some history here in the program. And I guess just to get us started, I guess I would just like for you to each sort of tell us a little bit about, your history with the Broad, with MIA, and the field in general, and in light of it being such a dynamic and almost turbulent last 10 years. The last 10 years have been so big for biomedicine and machine learning, this intersection. Tell us a little bit about something that may have surprised you, something that you weren't expecting that did happen over the past decade or so. Here you'll have to turn them on, though. There's a little switch. Yeah.
I'll get started.
Please do.
I'm Aviv. I'm currently in Genentech and Roche, and I was for many years actually here at the Broad. I was a faculty member here, and at MIT I was at the U's, and I founded and actually ran the Klarman Cell Observatory for several years. Way back, more than 10 years ago, we had a process at the Broad that we called Broad Next 10, which was that was when Broad turned 10. I see Noam nodding. Some people here are, have been here for a while. We had a process at the Broad to try and imagine what our next 10 years should look like. And I had the pleasure to chair the scientific frontiers part of it, which was like, what would our science look like in the future? And in some way that I can't remember, I ran into Alex and John. I just can't remember the context we were doing. And then we did these things with the math department, you remember? But I can't remember exactly why, but it was in the context of the Broad Next 10. And they had this idea to do MIA. And my contribution to MIA is that I said, well, we had a little bit of funding for Scientific Frontiers to do things, and we paid for the bagels. That is actually historically accurate. It is literally true. I think we also helped a little bit at pulling the math to the front. Something that struck me when I watched the video is when I came here, people did math on the walls, right? Because you couldn't do actually the science without it, but they didn't do math on the slides. It just wasn't there. When you would come to, I would do the same. When I would prepare my talk, I would bend over backward to make it go away, right? To simplify, to cartoonify it, to explain the intuition, but never to actually put the equation, because there wouldn't be anyone in the audience who would resonate with the equation or would want to know it. And moreover, it was actually a deterrent. It was something that would make, oh, the talk is inaccessible. This doesn't matter for me. This is, why are you showing me that? I think MIA brought the math back on the slide, weirdly enough. Yeah, and that was a huge thing. I was asked what surprised me in the last 2 decades, in the last decade, and I'm going to just use 2 things. There's probably many others, but they are very personal to me. First of all, I never would have imagined I would use the word artificial intelligence with a straight face every day and actually mean it. Right? It was always, you don't use that word. You just say machine learning. It's all just machine learning. I treat it very differently now. I think that surprised me beyond my wildest dreams. And I've seen a lot of science dreams come true in the last decade. Single-cell genomics happening, CRISPR happening, and deep learning happening in a single year was like the best thing ever. But the AI piece that came later, that was, it was kind of the dream, but beyond the dream, and being able to just say it every day is fun. So I just do. So that's one. And the second one, which is more of a motivator, is, and that's for me related to my own personal move, is that I never imagined how hard it is to make medicines and how satisfying it is at the same time. Doing something that's like that failure prone, and yet you sometimes get bizarre satisfaction out of, is unusual. But that's for me the other big thing. I do think AI can actually help with that. Three of us, but Gevorg should move next to me.
True. I just want to say, first of all, it just feels a little bit surreal to be at this. Yeah, and emotional. I'm having really good emotions. To be with all of you and the folks who have helped build this community. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But yeah, and Aviv, you're a hard act to follow, but it's also amazing to be sitting next to you on this panel after all this time. You know, yeah. Awesome. I'm Alex Bloemendal. I am an institute scientist at the Broad. I'm focused at this point on interdisciplinary and including external collaborations that bring to bear, sort of state-of-the-art computational techniques on the problems of translational genomics and genomic medicine. So right now I'm working with the translational genomics group at MPG, the program for medical and population genetics, where I was, for a while I was at the data sciences platform, and I spent some time in. Well, let me go back to the beginning. So I joined the Broad 10 years ago, originally in Ben Neal's group, co-founding the HAIL project for scalable genomic analysis with John Bloom, who's in the audience. And with Cottonseed. And we were sort of all mathematicians getting really interested in genomics and genomic medicine and all the opportunities that we were sort of perceived as we started to get to know people in the Broad community, and trying to learn a lot in a really short amount of time, and trying to sort of teach ourselves as much genetics and computational biology and machine learning, as we could, and you realize there were all these amazing people here working in these areas in their individual groups and labs, but that there wasn't a central kind of community for people to come together and share ideas and teach and learn, teach each other and learn from each other, and spark new collaborations and all of that, And so, I mean, it sort of started as a reading club, and then it grew quite quickly. And people stat math reading club, smirk. Yeah. That's right, in the data sciences platform. And then it sort of grew, and there was this like FOMO moment where people were like, hey, I heard about this thing, why am I not invited? And then we were like, okay, we definitely need to, move to the auditorium and make it bigger. And at that point, and have bagels, yeah. Now,
there was a desperate need for those bagels.
Yeah.
Alex, can you remember some of the first sort of topics that you done in this reading club and kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we focused on basics, which, for a while, really foundational stuff like, dimensional reduction and, different aspects of regression and, regularization and, and that was good for my own learning as well, and to teach us to learn twice and all that. And I'd done a lot of teaching in mathematics before, but to really get into that space in this interdisciplinary field was a whole new thing. So Aviv's sponsorship, not just at the level of bagels, but at the level of like institutional support, actually meant a lot. And I really want to call that in a serious way. No, it changed everything and made it possible for this community to grow in the way that it did. And so did the whole team of people that sort of formed it. I mean, John and I quickly realized that we couldn't host a seminar series by ourselves, that this was neither scalable nor like a good idea. And to bring in people who represented all these other areas of expertise and all these other perspectives. And Alex co-chaired with me for a long time too, and really helped build this community. So it's awesome to be sitting next to you and see you again as well, Alex. And then, and so all the people on the steering committee are incredible administrative assistants. I believe it may have been, correct me if I'm wrong, but it may have actually been Letitia's idea. She's unfortunately no longer at the Broad, but to do the 10th anniversary, she's like, wait, there's 10 years? Like, we should do a thing, so... and we've had incredible energy and organizational support, and then also the AV team, Scott and Russell and all the other people on that team. So I want to express a lot of gratitude as well as I sit here today. The surprise, yeah. Something that surprised me. I guess, I've not just how challenging, but how interesting the challenges are of true interdisciplinary collaboration. It's a bit of a kind of vague answer maybe, but it's really like the devil's in the details, getting people to actually come together, realizing that, people don't necessarily understand the words you're using or the way you're using them, and really just digging in and finding that shared understanding and cohabiting a problem space together and really making progress with people across different disciplines toward one shared goal. It's been totally fascinating, and I don't think I would have predicted how satisfying it is to spend time on that specifically, to look to as a primary challenge 10 years ago.
Wow. Hi, everybody. This looks like MIA, like I remember it, a room full of people. I don't know why we're not writing on the whiteboard, even though equations on the slide, yes, but also a lot of whiteboard to process stuff. Yeah. So yeah, my name is Alex Goeva. I'm so happy to be here. It brings a lot of emotions to be back. And I don't know if I can speak to the whole 10 years of MIA or ML and biology or AI and biology, because actually came to this field maybe about 7-8 years ago, and it was through maybe a chance encounter with Alex, who came to give a seminar talk at my PhD department, which was BU Math and Stats department. So I was doing theoretical, what we call machine learning now at that time, not biology. But was thinking maybe not about the next 10 years of biology and AI, I was thinking about the next 10 years of me in science. And was really just feeling a pull to use that rigor that I like to work on, but to channel it in both pedagogical directions and also in applications. And I had a passion for biology since high school, but I wasn't working in it actively. And so when I met Alex, another mathematician who was now working at the Broad, and of course I knew the Broad, I had walked by it so many times and knew about the amazing science, but realizing that there can be a use for someone with my skill set at a place like that was really inspiring. And MIA already existed. Alex let me know about it. I started attending it, met John and Alex, and then just one thing led to another. I became a postdoc here. and was one of those people that was recruited to help with the organization of MIA. And let me tell you, now that I've been away from the Broad for about 1.5 years at my position in Toronto, I can really appreciate how special MIA is and how special the Broad is for being able to cultivate an environment like that. It's really unique. Okay, now briefly, something that has surprised me. Yeah, perhaps as someone trained in math, where things follow logically and usually always lead to the same conclusion every time, it definitely surprises me that the same data in the hands of different people could lead to very different results. I don't know if artificial intelligence can help us with that, but we'll see.
The same person on a different day.
Right.
Hopefully not.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gevorg Grigoryan. I'm a co-founder and CTO at Generate Biomedicines. So my relationship to MIT, I've never been at the Broad, but I was a Ph.D. student in the biology department in Amy Keating's lab. So it was more have walked by this building many times, and then, have been inside since then many times. But yeah, I think MIT is where, many ways my scientific journey started. I was a PhD student here. I studied protein design at a time when, we won't say how many years ago it was, but it was a number of years ago at the time where the field was really just starting, and it was really fun. And I was, schooled in the frame of thought that was the predominant one at the time for understanding molecules, which is what I call the bottom-up, the standard reductionist approach, where we characterize details of molecular interactions, atomistic interactions, and then integrate them forward to make predictions. I went on to do a postdoc at University of Pennsylvania, Bill DeGrotto, similarly in protein design, and started my lab at Dartmouth. Now, the thing that I think has been surprising, first of all, I think it's just been such an amazing time to be probably in almost any science, but especially in sort of generally molecular science and that connection between molecules and biology, because the methodology happened, the kind of the experimental methodology to look, to see, to measure, to understand at scale sort of happened at the same time as the methodology to integrate over all those data and come up with some interesting generalizations. All of that happened at the same time. So when I actually think back to my PhD days, all the things that we used to muse and dream about as surely unrealistic, but boy, wouldn't it be amazing if that were true, actually happened. All right, so that's maybe like broadly surprise number one. I very much relate to what Aviv said about AI. I mean, when we started Generate, it was a hard and fast rule, like no, piece of PR or anything that came out of Generate was allowed to use AI. Well, people wanted to say it because we had smarter PR people than I am, and they wanted to use AI. They wanted to get on that train, and I was like, no way, you can't do it. It's not scientific. We're scientific here. Other companies can say whatever they want, but we're going to say machine learning. And it's actually this year, Aviv, I don't know if it happened earlier for you, but I eventually gave in. I gave in late. When it was like, okay, I think this doesn't matter anymore. You can call it whatever you want. The point is, it's amazing. So I relate to that surprise. But I think that the deep scientific surprise for me, and it kind of actually is the through line for my career, my scientific career, why I started Generate and all of it. When I went to my postdoc, so I learned kind of like the molecular view of the world in my PhD. And I went for my postdoc, and Bill DeGrotto, he's a trained chemist, so he was very interested in protein design and computational techniques, but he could also just look at structures and understand stuff about them, right, in a way that I was just completely blown away. And it got me, that was the thing that got me curious about, well, clearly he's not computing Van der Waals energies in his head. Right? He's just looking at this stuff and somehow, from experience, from having seen other things before, coming up with fairly quantitative ways to think, describe, and predict these things. And they actually work more frequently than my calculations do. So I think that kind of where that seed of like, is there maybe a different way to tackle this sort of set of problems? You know, I was always into rigor, you know, data fitting was a bad word, right? I was not into that, but at the same time, I couldn't otherwise explain what I was seeing. So that got me down that path. So I think the surprise was that when I finally said, okay, well, let me see what you can accomplish with a data-driven model. You know, can you build some type of a, you know, rigorous statistical methodology? Maybe doesn't assume anything about atoms or understanding of physics, and nevertheless works. I think the surprise was that out of the box, immediately that worked better than anything that I had done, you know, previously in my entire kind of scientific career. Now, it didn't work a lot better, but this is where the benefit of having hit your head against that wall for decades came in, because what I saw, I already knew this is the way to tackle this problem. And then came many written grants that people didn't understand, and like just frustration, why aren't things moving faster, which is why, you know, I eventually founded the company, and that's how I scratched that itch. But I think the extent to which that sort of crazy idea actually turned out to be true and sort of really flipped how you think about complex systems, at least for me, I think that's my big surprise.
That's really fascinating. You know, but from all of you, you're getting the sense that, oh, it's amazing that it works. But from Alex and Aviv, there's also the side of it. You know, there's deep challenges to getting it to execute. And it seems that you guys started MIA with this, you know, intuition that learning from data was the thing that we needed to learn. And as a community, we're all really focused on, you know, thinking about what are the skills that are going to be relevant for the future, and how we set ourselves up for those. You know, it'd be great to hear, you know, what do you think those skills are going to be for the next 10 years? Is there a core set of things that we all need to do, or is there, you know, how do we differentiate ourselves in this kind of turbulent time where stuff is really exciting and works really well, but also there are some genuine challenges to be solved?
I can try and comment on this. I will start by saying I'm not the most planful person. I think people retrofit the story after it happened is a very typical thing. It's also done, by the way, in how people write papers. We did this and then we did that, whereas you know for a fact you didn't do this and then had a brilliant idea and then did that. You did this for one reason, you did that for another reason. When you put the paper together, you finally see that this is actually related to that. It's fine, it's just not a historical account. But I think one thing to really realize is that you can be in two different points in science, and we're decidedly in one kind versus the other. Most of the time, you're within an established situation. So there's kind of a foundation of knowledge, a way of doing things. It's not just the knowledge, it's also the way in which you think in the science and the way in which you operate, what is considered to be an interesting answer, which, by the way, is dramatically different from field to field. Physicists and biologists have exactly opposite views on phenomenology, which physicists love and biologists don't. They just don't, and that's it. You can't really say why, but they don't. And the others do. So that kind of distinction really matters. That's, if you're in a field in its more established moment, all of these things are there. And then questions like, what are the skills for, are really, they have a very low uncertainty related to them. And that's most of the time. And then once in a while, you're in a moment where the field does not exist even. No one has had it before. So if you wind back to like 2012 and single-cell genomics, there wasn't single-cell genomics. It didn't exist. So the first time you got data, there was nothing. There was no skill you could learn or paper you could read. You kind of had to hack it together and cobble it. And sometimes 7 years later, when people still do it that way, you're like, it was just some idea. It wasn't even a good one, right? It was just some way to get ahead with it. So in my opinion, we're in that moment, but way more big time than in anything else that I have seen in my years in science. And I agree with Gevorg. That's why I said, for me, 2012 was the dream. 2011, 2012, actually. It started in 2011. A lot of things were already happening there. In 2012, you see them out, right? Either your own or those of others, and you're like, all of my wishes just came through. I just don't know how that is possible. And it takes 10 years to see how they all play out, but you know, okay? So this is the moment now, just like way more amplified. I think like in several ways, and fundamentally because the way of thinking about science is changing dramatically. And you're going to make it happen. And you're not going to make it happen by knowing ahead of time what are the skills, because those skills have not been invented yet. You're going to invent them by actually doing it. If you go back to other moments in science that were like that, it was the same. There weren't skills and techniques and approaches. People kind of, they hacked them together. And they existed because they had a passion for the problem and a sense of the opportunity. And the human mind is still a pretty unbelievably amazing thing. It just comes up with stuff way out of distribution. So it's, to me, that's where you want to anchor in, more than in the specifics. And you want to remember that just like the algorithms learn, so does the human brain. And if there's some skill that you will need, you're smart, you're going to go ahead and you're going to learn it. And the things we do today are definitely not what I learned when I was in university. I'm sure not what you learned when you were an undergrad, and it doesn't matter. Math will carry you through, by the way. That's one of the really, really awesome things about it. So kind of everything is going to change. I'll give you 2 examples of why I mean it's going to change. So one is, in biological sciences, people still look for the answer in the data that they actually measured, to the vast extent. And we're moving to a world where you look for the answer in the model, not in the data. For biologists, this is a dramatic shift. So if you look at single-cell genomics, for single-cell genomics, you want to find a cell, go, profile a lot of cells, you'll find a cell. No one has found yet a cell out of a model. Not one. As far as I know, maybe they have, but they haven't published it. Or maybe they've published it and I haven't read it, or the AI didn't read it for me. But in any case, you discover it by its existence in front of you, measured from the system. If the models really get there, they will say, well, there needs to exist a cell type that's like that. And it's going to look like this. And it's never been measured. That means the model actually found something interesting for me. It didn't just organize, represent, allow me to do all sorts of parlor tricks. It did something fundamental. If you live in a world like that, you think differently in science, in biological sciences specifically. And maybe other things will change too. Labs are going to change dramatically. The way labs and computation will change. So a computational scientist will have to, will have, as part of their algorithm, they will have the experiment. The experiment will not generate data on which you will work. The experiment will be part of the algorithm, the technique that you develop. It won't be like this and then that. Those kinds of things are a different way of thinking. And it takes time to adapt to it, and it's done as a collective. No human does it alone. So that's to me the skills question.
Maybe if I can add to that, I completely agree with what Aviv said, and what an eloquent way to express it. Maybe one thing I would add is, I hear this question a lot, right? And I think a little bit of the question, behind the question, it's not everything, but a little bit behind it is, these tools just came out and they're like really good. They're really smart. They know a lot more than I do. They can do a lot more than I can do. What is it that we need to learn anymore? Do we still have to teach, what about me? Do we still have to teach kids? Like, how does that change education? And I think, maybe just to step back and think about that for just a minute. Obviously, how do we kind of typically instruct science, right? There is the skills and the knowledge, right, that we teach people for a while, right? We kind of tell them about the ideal gas, that this thing exists. This is the equation. Maybe we derive it for them. That kind of understanding. We tell them how real gases behave. Then we teach them how to integrate by parts and give them 1,000 examples so they get really good at it. So that's a really important part right now of becoming a scientist. And then later, when you sort of prove yourself as an artisan, that you can do these things, that you have the knowledge and you know how to use the tools, later in the current curriculum, you get to think about new questions, think about science, because now you've got the capacity. And that's what, I don't even know what the right word for it is, but let's call it like the art of doing science, right? That's where you develop your taste. That's where you kind of develop your algorithm for how you put a problem into parts and solve it. I think people are really worried about what about the skills, like which skills do we teach? Do we still teach people to integrate, all that stuff? And I think that's maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Like that stuff will shake itself out. For instance, we still teach kids to calculate many, many years after calculators exist, and they will always do better than humans at every kind of calculation. But it turned out it's still important to have people have intuition about quantities, because that's really helpful. I think something like that will shake out in other things as well. But what is happening is because of these tools, I think we can move up that artistic part of science much earlier, because maybe you don't actually need to like prove yourself out on all aspects of every piece of skill set to actually start engaging with real questions. Maybe that's actually what LLMs and automatic reasoning kind of systems allow you to do, is to introduce for students, the ability to engage with real interesting questions much earlier and teach them to do the real research, the real question asking much earlier. At least that's kind of one thing I would add.
I guess I just want to give a gentle counterpoint, which is just maybe to strike a note of caution not to skip the basics. Because I think it can be tempting to fly with these new techniques and these giant data sets, and into this space, which I wholeheartedly agree with Aviv and Gevorg. That's where the future is. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand what you're doing, and just like we teach kids to multiply and do long division, I think it's important to understand basic, what we really do still think of as ML models, what nobody would call AI, and to understand what it means to train and fit these models, and what is actually going on when you fit these models. And so I just if the question is about students, then I do think it's important to take some time to not skip that.
I just want to say to the record that I fully agree. I didn't actually answer the question for, say, an undergrad student, a high school student.
No,
even
later in the career.
Even in the grad student phase, you're still kind of in that transition.
Totally.
I think the audience, a lot of it is a little after that and still asks. But I think at every point in your career, there are some basics that you actually don't know, or that you've known and you kind of started forgetting. And it's kind of, you notice it when you have kids and they're at a certain age and you're like, I totally know this stuff. And you're like, I don't remember. I haven't touched it in many, many years, this angle of math or this aspect of another area of science, or even something like in, human history that you knew, you really knew, you understood, you had a deep understanding of it even. And it's kind of like it's gotten fuzzy. So first of all, you can very easily re-anchor into it. It's actually here. You kind of have to try it a couple of times, then it's like click, and it's like, it's like riding the bike piece. And having that inside you shapes your thinking every day. So I agree with the calculator.
Pounding in that full stack of knowledge.
Versus the calculations, the basics, and so on. And also you have to remember, this is really a formidable computational thing. And you need to feed things like that. You have to train them. You pre-train them. You have to fine-tune them. All those things we do all the time, that's what makes them go. So I'm completely with you. I was just trying to give one other thought that occurred to me when you were talking. I think the question is 50% fear, like what's going to happen to me. But there's also going to be a lot of frustration along the road. I think you mentioned frustration. Frustration is an incredibly positive emotion if you think about it from the opportunity side. It's like you get frustrated when you think something can happen, but it's not happening. Not happening makes you unhappy. So that's the negative side, but something can happen. So when you get frustrated, go and feel that something can happen. And as Gevorg said, he just went and did something a little different. And it all worked out really nicely.
Yeah, I agree with all of the points made so far. And just maybe to put it more abstractly, I would say the core skills that I think are important and will continue to be important are to think creatively, collaboratively, and critically. So you have to be able to come up with questions and creative ways to solve them with other people, but you also have to be able to think critically, and this is a lot of where that rigor is really important to know whether a solution is worthwhile.
Last piece, which is about communication. I think you should, that part deserves to be taken seriously as a first class skill, especially in this interdisciplinary context. So, practice explaining your ideas to people who don't share your background, and realize when they don't use the words the same way you do, or and this is related to teaching, but it goes all the way through to the cutting edge research.
That's very familiar for me as a physicist who had to talk to a lot of biologists, especially in my Ph.D. and postdoc. In light of time, I think we're going to move to the next question, but we've
I have to add one more thing, because Alex by now said, Alex said by now twice on rigor. There's going to be so much vibe and fuzz actually in the world now because of AI. Yeah. A lot of it, and people could seem like they know what they're talking about. That's actually going to become more and more and more of a problem. It's an empowering thing too, because you can kind of manage around things you don't exactly know with help, which is nice. But rigor is going to be extraordinarily important. And I at least have never found something that teaches rigor in the same way that math does, which is why I think that fundamental is extraordinarily important. But it's literally needed in order also to serve as a counterpoint to something that will become almost there, fuzzily there, vibe-like there, but it's not actually there. So that's a responsibility, I think, for this community.
Absolutely. So we've been talking a little bit about questions, like what are the questions going to be? What are the questions that people have? And as researchers, we're always asking questions. And, there have been a lot of interesting questions that have been at the seed of these efforts that sort of brought out new fields like single cell, et cetera, almost de novo. We ask these questions and we realize we don't know the answer, and that pushes us forward. And I think that we're sort of at an interesting space in machine learning and biomedicine right now, where number one, new questions are sort of, coalescing, still sort of inchoate, but at the same time, they are not really as localized just in the academy as they might have been. So like, in Genentech, you are producing, and a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are publishing cutting edge machine learning papers in ways that I don't think would have been, understood or expected 10 years ago. And I think, I guess my next question is going to be, what are the kinds of questions that we're going to be addressing in this new context, and how are we going to be splitting the effort for addressing these questions between the academic community, medicine itself, like medical schools, and also industry. And how are these sort of new configurations going to be pushing forward the science?
Maybe I can jump in this time. So, yeah, I think maybe I'll answer the first one, and I think there's a piece of an answer for the second one. So, which is, what questions are going to be important? I mean, so first of all, I think it goes back to Socrates, if I remember correctly, right? Asking the right question is half the answer, or something like that, in the Socratic method. And so I'm a big believer in that. But my interpretation of that concept is less that life is about winning the question asking lottery, that you just have to ask the right question and then everything will happen, because I think actually the limiting resource, especially today, is not the questions. I mean, they can be come up with almost at scale nowadays, and I'm not just saying everything has to be done by AI, but AI can help with that. We can ask questions. I think the limiting resource is just curiosity. Is kind of a good question is a question that you're really curious about enough that you're going to keep digging and get to an answer. I think it's very difficult to predict a priori what's really going to move science. I mean, we can have some predictive ability, but I think it's a lot easier to ascertain whether you're curious enough about something than its ultimate impact. And I would definitely index a lot on curiosity. And make sure that what you're asking, you really, really want to find out. And there's a good chance if you do it well, it'll be impactful and useful. And I would care less, my personal opinion, maybe others have a different algorithm, but I would care less about predicting, you know, the right question to ask to land the right paper, to land the right, you know, next job and so on. I would actually mostly really index on curiosity. Now, in terms of how, so maybe that there's a thing in there about how to divide. I mean, do we have to divide? I mean, if we go by curiosity as a principle, then I think a company should be answering questions they're really curious about, and academia should be answering questions they're really curious about.
Well, if not divide, maybe collaborate.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of industry, academic collaborations, especially blowing up in the pharma space right now.
I mean, I think that's amazing. I just think that there's a moment now where, you know, particularly around biology and scalable techniques applied to biology and insights and so on, where, you know, let's be honest, profit motive on the one hand, foundational understanding on the other hand, are just kind of converging, right? And like we all want the same thing, probably for different reasons, or a mixture of reasons, but let's use that to our advantage and crack some problems.
Share some reflections. I think the really big questions tend to stay for a really, really long time. So it's more like there are more specific formulation shifts. And often sometimes that formulation shifts for interesting conceptual reasons. People literally do not see something is there until they know it's there, and then they ask questions about it. Nice example is cells. Before the 1600s, we didn't know cells existed. No one would ask questions about something they don't know is there. But once you know it's there, people ask a lot of questions about it. Same is true for atoms, for that matter. It's not unique to cells. I just like them. So that type of thing, you don't get that often. And then the questions tend to last for a really, really long time for many of those things. They tend to end up being in science complex enough that we don't solve them that quickly. There is a second layer, which is sort of how you formulate the question. And that often shifts, but what you can actually do, rather than the concepts that you have. And when you can start doing something, you start asking questions that fit the things that you can do. So that's the way in which those things shift. But many of our questions kind of stay really the same. I would encourage people to think maybe about two perspectives that could be useful. Sometimes a question, in biology, I'm focusing specifically on that, biology, molecules, medicine. Sometimes a question sits in kind of firmly in the not really tractable category for a while, and it becomes not really practically tractable and can move into the tractable territory, or I would say possibly tractable territory. And when that moment can happen, that's something to pay a lot of attention to, and you want to ask yourself that. So a nice example of that is combinations in genetics. Combinations in genetics was seen as a practically intractable problem, because you could very quickly do back-of-the-envelope calculation, the number blows up. You cannot do that many experiments. Actually, I can repeat that. Not you, not anyone can do that number of experiments. There's not enough biology, physical cells in the world, for example, for all the experiments you would need to do in order to test every possibility. And hence, the problem sits firmly in that category, except in the general sense. In the specific sense, you can always do an experiment and see what happens. But in the general sense, I won't be able to tell you what will happen in the next one. People don't think that anymore about this problem. They understand it differently, partly because data changed, and partly because our computational understanding changed on what can happen. And those two together have said, oh, the system might be organized a little differently than I thought, and if it's organized this way, today I understand that things like that might actually be much more generally addressable. That opens up a whole industry of people, I don't mean in the corporate sense, of people solving the problem, which is not solved yet. It's not even close to solved yet, maybe, but it's definitely moving as a problem that people are working on, rather than a problem that sits in that other category of there's no point, because you can't. There are other problems that are like that, and some of them are very big and can be very, very impactful. I agree with Gevorg that I wouldn't worry too much about how the problems partition. People go after a problem when it's relevant for what interests them. And interest includes their curiosity, but humans tend to be curious about things that they're interested in. Why? Sometimes they're interested for this reason. People are motivated by many different reasons. But once they're interested, they work on something. So I agree that you will see the problems and the places in the world that tackle them to shift like that based on it. And finally, for the industry versus academia divide, at least for the biological and biomedical sciences, industry scientists and academic scientists tend to work on the same problems. This is actually not new at all. It's not correct for decades and decades and decades, because it's actually the same problems. In industry, people just try to solve it ultimately in the human organism, because they try to address diseases, and diseases of humans happen in humans. So that adds a whole world of constraints and considerations and so on, but it's actually the same problems.
So it's very interesting that you guys raised the issue of the principles of, curiosity, but also pragmatism, what you can actually do. But, the things that you choose to do, for example, Alex, you chose Goeva, you chose to leap into biology. That shaped your curiosity, and so how do you think about that? And reflecting on that decision, Alex, do you see yourself driven by pragmatism or curiosity, or how do you think about that?
I mean, when I made this shift myself a little over a decade ago, it was both. It was very much both. I think I had always been sort of fascinated from afar by the genetic code and the secret of life and all of that, but hadn't realized the opportunities of bringing like quantitative tools to bear because of the way that data was scaling up, the way that sequencing was becoming cheaper and more scalable and all that. And then I also was myself. I was very motivated also by the potential of these things to getting that actually transform our understanding of health and disease and get all the way to the clinical endpoint. Like this problems that are actually in the physical and in particular in the human world. As a pure mathematician who was used to thinking about abstract theoretical frameworks and theorems and proofs, this was kind of revolutionary to me and very motivating. And so it was very much both for me. And I guess a third motivation for me was getting to work not just with a community of fellow experts in the same sort of subdiscipline, but getting to work in an interdisciplinary way, and the dynamical nature of that kind of collaboration was a huge draw for me too. It was just more fun, So I guess I wanted to reflect a little bit on something that came up in the previous question too, if it's okay to go back. Just give an example of the kind of I think some of these grand challenges stick around for a long time, but I also think there can be these shifts that occur on kind of decade timescales. And I just wanted to give an example of such a shift. One of the sort of two grand challenges that Todd Golub, the current Broad director, laid out recently as we kind of enter the next decade after the first 20 years of the Broad is converting genetic variation associated with disease into mechanistic insights that can inform, therapeutic hypotheses. And this is, for a long time, it was, let's get all the genetic variation associated with disease. And that was like the thing. And it was sort of, I guess there was this assumption that would show us the way, and that we would then we would understand, the genes and the cell types, and I guess partly due to, at least in common and complex disease, the challenges of polygenicity, for various reasons, it just that next step of translation into mechanistic insights has been far from automatic, and it turns out like that's the thing we totally need to focus on as a field there. The other grand challenges from the Broad's perspective is around programmable therapeutics and scaling up genetic medicines to really be scalable across common and rare disease. But I guess it's interesting to watch these shifts occur at the sort of macro level of the fields, and then have that inform the problems that we each think about. I think the division between, I want to speak briefly about that too, division between different kind of sectors of the biomedical ecosystem I don't know if I have a single insight there, but I guess I do want to surface a concern I sometimes have that I think we should all be thinking about as members of this community and just of society more broadly, which is sometimes I worry that the incentive structures that we have don't necessarily guarantee that the fruits of all the research that we do and then this, the curiosity and the research enterprise will actually transform the standard of care and bring benefit to all, and not just those who can afford access to sort of cutting edge medicines. And this is to be sure a conversation that goes beyond science to the policy level. But I think as scientists in a changing and challenging world, this is, we need to be part of that conversation and engage with these problems.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Alex, just a quick comment. On the question. The pragmatism versus curiosity and interdisciplinary side of things. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I can relate to all of the three main motivations that Alex shared with us as well. I just vividly remember my PhD office in a basement without windows and my occasional interactions with other humans around my research. And it was and remains very important for me to be useful. And I just found that I'm more useful when I have regular opportunities to interact with humans. Not everyone's like that. And I might change. But that was a big motivation.
So do we have time for some audience questions?
I think we actually are basically at time now. We've managed to fill the entire block, and we actually have a couple of lightning talks coming up right now after we get set up. We're going to be starting with Gevorg getting set up, but I would also like to thank our lovely panelists for a really enlightening, insightful, and a grand perspective in this discussion that we've just had here. So I really appreciate all of your insights and contributions here.
I want to take a second to close back to where we started, like how MIA started, and I told you about that Scientific Frontiers effort. I said this many times. I just want to say it on the record that I believe from all the things that we actually did out of Scientific Frontiers formally, this, which was the investment of the bagels, was by far the most impactful.
Pretty high ROI. Low denominator.